As they say, information is power, and we'll be informing you about what's fresh off the press, what you can expect in today's dailies. We'll take a look at Kenya's bold newspaper, The Standard, The Daily Nation, The Business Daily, Taifa Leo as well, just encompassing some of the top stories that have been covered in the dailies as we take a look at what's made news in the last 24 hours. So do join us. Later on, I'll be introducing my panelists, but allow me to take you through what has been encompassed in the papers, what you can expect once you grab yourself an edition of Kenya's bold newspaper, The Standard, and that's where we start today. This is the headline, all to do with some of the sentiments that have followed that particular Supreme Court ruling, all to do with the LGBTQ community and giving them the leeway to form associations. So just yesterday, we had from the two principals, President William Ruto and Raila Odinga equally spoke on this. And there you have it, the front page of The Standard going big with that particular story, not in Kenya. Ruto to same-sex unions, where he actually drew the red line. And equally, leaders across the political divide have added their voice and have united in condemning recent Supreme Court decision to allow members of the LGBTQ community to form associations, saying it is a window to legalizing same-sex engagements that are against culture. And the president is quoted right there. That's what he said. This can happen elsewhere, but it will not happen in Kenya. Let me assure women that I will not allow other women to bring competition. If the men take all the men, where will you get husbands? Of course, he was speaking to women caucus who were congregated just yesterday as he sort of relaunched a couple of women kitties, the Women Empowerment Fund. Definitely a lot more details on page 6. But The Standard going big with that particular story, all to do with the reactions thereafter. The Supreme Court ruling allowing the LGBTQ community to form associations. A little bit at the bottom right there, we have what Raila was doing yesterday, meeting some of the Muslim clerics, where he held a meeting with them. And the Azimio leader, Raila Odinga, interacts with Muslim imams at Jaramogi Odinga Foundation in Nairobi yesterday. Among the issues discussed include marginalization in government, cost of living, and the same-sex judgment by the Supreme Court. Don't discriminate us. That's what the message is from the Muslim clerics, directed towards the president and his administration. Perhaps they're feeling left out due to the impetus that has been put towards national prayers. Definitely Kenya being a Christian country, we definitely have various denominations, and they shouldn't feel left out. Part of the message that is being passed by the Muslim clerics, of course, amongst other issues, including marginalization in government, cost of living, and their reactions to that particular ruling on same-sex marriage by the Supreme Court. On edge, anxiety among Uhuru appointees. That's on the national page 5. And it's definitely a reaction following the hammer that has fallen on the administration, the previous administration appointees. And we've definitely seen sweeping changes across various parastatals. Most recently, the Kenya Revenue Authority, where the president exercised his powers and appointed people perhaps who were in line with his agenda. But it's definitely a cause of concern for the appointees who came into office during the Uhuru era. Find out more details on page 5, where President William Ruto has been kicking them out of government one after another. So who is next? That's a big question. Was Mary Gishohi recalled from China? Find out on page 5. We'll get to deliberate that with my panelists a little bit later on. But page 12 on the national pages, Governor fails to explain how he spent 3 billion shillings over the course of 5 years, where the money was spent, but there is no proper paperwork to show how it was done or projects to justify the expenditure. Definitely a cause of concern, even as the Controller of Budget sort of pushes towards taking a look at some of the expenditure through the various financial years. And definitely this governor is on the spotlight. Find out who exactly he is on page 12 of the Standard, even as we take a look at the mismanagement that has been devolved into counties, a cause of concern, even though devolution has had its fruits across the 47 counties. Definitely a lot more needs to be done in terms of accountability and service delivery. Page 12 with more details on that. At the top right there, you have more details. What's been covered on the national page 8. Fuliza at stake as petitioner asks for 300 billion shillings refund. Find out what's going on there in the corridors of justice. Even as the world page 33 goes big with what we've seen in Nigeria following that particular presidential election that was held on the 25th of February. A lot of expectations from from Africa's largest economy. And we saw the INEC, that is the Electoral Commission, declare the winner in that particular election, the candidate who was supported by the incumbent. And of course, a lot to borrow from Nigeria. Was it a case of the opposition splitting their votes? Because as we saw, the winner of the election got roughly 8 million votes according to the official results, while those coming in second and third position split in 6 million votes with a margin between them there. So is it a case of the opposition splitting and giving the win to the victor, Tinubu? Find out more on the world page. That's page 33. Equally on the business page 29, KRA to spy on traders' transactions. Perhaps all this in a bid to boost their revenue collection, expanding the bracket as well. And we've definitely seen a couple of developments in the recent past when it comes to tax waivers and whatnot. Is this a move in the right direction? Find out more on the business page 29 and how KRA is set to spy on traders' transactions. For the sports enthusiast, page 40 has you covered. Shujaa out to claim lost glory. Find out more about the rugby exploits by the Shujaa team. That's what has been covered on the Standard, and we'll get to interrogate some of those stories that are making headlines on today's edition of the Kenyan Bold newspaper. Let's cross over to the Daily Nation so we can highlight what has been covered on the front page right there. This is a story you will find once you grab yourself a copy. Equally going big with the latest intrigues to do with the cost of living, and this is to do with the energy cost. Ruto, members of parliament, set for power price war. All to do with those IPPs, where a House committee yesterday threw out Kenya Power bosses, accusing them of lacking tangible measures to reduce electricity costs, which the lawmakers blamed on exorbitant deals with independent power producers, those IPPs run by cartels, shielded by utility firms. This even as the cabinet this week lifted the Uhuru era ban on procurement of new IPPs. So this is a move that perhaps will cost the already expensive electricity cost to spike. And it's a cause of concern not just to the lawmakers, but equally to the Kenyan households that might be affected one way or the other due to these certain changes. Energy, the ruling party lawmaker, sponsors motion to stop signing of new deals with IPPs. Interestingly, we'll be joined by a lawmaker right here. Perhaps he'll give us some intrigues about what's playing out on the floor of the House, even as we react to that particular ruling by the cabinet, the move to remove the Uhuru era ban on procurement of new IPPs. That's the independent power producers. Other stories covered on the front page of the Daily Nation, touching on education. A lot of concern when it comes to junior secondary school. And get this, 160,000 yet to report to grade 7 and Form 1. That's definitely concerning, bearing in mind the steps we've taken to actually inculcate the 100% transition, especially amongst Form 1s, once they are done with their KCPE and moving on to, to prepare for the KCSE examination in the secondary level. So this, coupled with the challenges we've seen in junior secondary schools, talk of the lack of books in most institutions, capacity challenges when it comes to laboratories and schools as well, and equally, books not being timely distributed to junior secondary schools. Definitely at a transition phase as a country, but we need more input when it comes to making this a success, making CBC a success. But there you have it, the back page of the Daily Nation covering the education matters right there. Even as recognition following that particular award that was handed over to Nurse Dahabo Bagaro, who was interviewed at her Ramata Nursing Home in Sololo, Marsabit County on February 27th. Positive news right here. And she has received plaudits for saving thousands of pastoralist mothers' lives. So recognition, it's proper to give them their flowers while they're still alive. So service to poor earns nurse accolades. That's equally on the front page. Find out more on page 3 of the Daily Nation. But this is yet another story we'll get to discuss. The delayed rains, and the weatherman now says we should tighten our belts. The long rains may fail yet again. I think this is the 4th or 5th consecutive season that the rains will fail if the weatherman is indeed correct. And Kenya is staring at a failed crop this season as the weatherman forecasts low average rains for the March, April, May period. This will definitely pile more inflationary pressure on millions of households that are already grappling with the high cost of living. The March to May rainy season is crucial in the country's farming calendar, as it is during this time that households plant the main crop of the year. So we definitely hope for better tidings when it comes to the forecasts. But according to the weatherman, we might have to tighten our belts, despite, the prayers that we've seen made on the national podiums. Definitely a cause of concern, even as we continue receiving statistics of 4.5 million Kenyans facing starvation, even as, multilateral donors and the government, county governments included, combine efforts to relieve those who are adversely affected by the ongoing drought and climate change, not just in Kenya, but the East African region as well. Let's cross over to what has been covered on the front page of the Business Daily. This is what you can expect. The big story touching on the economy. Central bank in the spotlight as lenders run out of dollars. Ooh, cause of concern right there. And we've definitely seen how the shilling has been performing against the dollar. And right now, central bank is in the spotlight as lenders seem to have run out of dollars. The banks ration scarce dollars for as little as $5,000. Traders struggle to access U.S. currency for supplies. And we well know in our economy, especially for importers, the dollar definitely plays a big part in their business. Manufacturers, general goods importers, need to meet their obligation, and this shortage of U.S. currency might hamper their business efforts. Find out more in terms of the forex reserves and imports cover as well. That's on the front page of the Business Daily. But they equally touch on other stories. Kenya set for IMF funds quota raise on reforms. Page 4 of the economy segment touching on that. The International Monetary Fund is set to raise Kenya's cash quota, giving it more headroom to access additional funding and boost its dwindling foreign exchange reserves. So IMF, the multilateral big brother, if I can call them that, definitely coming in and offering assistance in one way or the other, but at what cost? We'll definitely get to interrogate that later on. Economy, page 4, big with that story. State faces 12 billion KQ debt pressure. On page 7, find out how the government is racing against time to pay 12 billion shillings as part of a loan that the government guaranteed Kenya Airways 6 years ago. So the national carrier is set for relief from the government, but is it coming? That particular promise was granted 6 years ago. Safaricom location tracking to arrest bank ATM fraud, where Safaricom has rolled out an ATM vicinity check technology that will help banks ensure that cash withdrawals can only be conducted if the transacting customer is within the vicinity of the machine. And we've definitely seen some of the rising cases of banking fraud where criminals actually use victims' cards and their information to withdraw funds from certain ATM points. And this move by Safaricom will perhaps rein in on these criminals who have been stealing funds from cash machines, including cloning ATM cards, trapping the cards at the machines, and collecting information on the cards. Cybersecurity matters. Find out more on the tech segment on the Business Daily. Away from that particular paper, let's cross over to the Star. This is a big story of the day on the Star. No place for gays, lesbians, while I'm in charge. That is the president's statement just yesterday, where he termed homosexuality, same-sex marriage immoral and unconstitutional. Of course, reacting to that Supreme Court judgment, giving the LGBTQ community the leeway to form associations. But definitely we've seen the furor that has followed that particular ruling. Members of Parliament on the floor of the House quite vocal about it, including various leaders, not just political leaders, church leaders as well, adding their voice to this particular matter. Equally, on the Star, just at the bottom right there, allow us to take a look at the story. State House spends 4.8 million shillings daily on hospitality. That's according to the Controller of Budget. A cause of concern, bearing in mind the tough times we're living in and the austerity measures that have been called for by the same government. So is this a case of doublespeak? If State House is spending roughly 4.8 million shillings daily on hospitality, where the MDA is spending for past 3 months, and you can see some of the breakdown right there. Let me just zoom out so we can see the whole thing. And I'll just read it out for you. Domestic travel, 3 billion shillings. Foreign travel, 1.7 billion. Printing and advertising, 561 million. Rent, 1.6 billion. Training, 818 million. Hospitality, 1.8 billion. Vehicle maintenance, 366 million. Other assets maintenance, 267 million. And other economic items, 94.1 billion. So a breakdown of the gross total that has been spent under State House, 351 billion roughly. Find out if it's under this current administration or it's just during this financial year. But that's the story of the day. And still, it's a cause of concern, as I mentioned, the austerity measures that have been called for by this government. Yet, that's quite a large sum of money. Okay, away from that, the Bull Wangusi, the former Communications Authority Director General, who has been quoted right there as never pulled a punch to get his way, you know? Get out of my way or I'll tear you through, as we remember his memory. Kenya woman wins 38 million for preserving national artifacts. Find out more on that prestigious Dan David Prize that has been given to a Kenyan woman for preserving history. That's an excerpt of what you can expect on the front page of the Star. And perhaps let's cross over to Taifa Leo and take a look at the big story of the day, especially for the Swahili enthusiasts who are watching us back at home. That's the big story of the day. Magavana waasi wahisi joto. Well, the political temperature seems to be rising, quite literally. Ambapo wanasema vinara wa Azimio wamekuwa wakishambulia magavana kwa kususia vikao wakisema wametiwa mfukoni na Rais William Ruto. Perhaps a reaction to what we saw over the weekend when Azimio was in Trans Nzoia County. Governor George Natembeya was a no-show, and definitely over the course of the week we've seen him defend himself, equally members of County Assembly defending him, saying he was focused on development matters that day. He wasn't able to attend the Azimio rally in Trans Nzoia County. So magavana wa Azimio ambao wamekuwa wakikwepa mikutano inayoongozwa na Raila, sasa wanataka vinara wa Azimio wakome kuwashambulia. It's only time will tell. Let's see if the exchange of words will stop, even as remember the countdown to the mass action is still ongoing. Was it a 14-day ultimatum? And we had from the president definitely putting his foot down. So interesting developments await next week. But all we hope for is peace and tranquility in the country. Apart from that, tambiko la Luo kwa Mzee Otondi, mwenyekiti wa baraza la jamii ya Waluo, atafanyiwa tambiko hii leo kabla kuzikwa Jumamosi. That's what you can expect on the front page of Taifa Leo. Hadi ukurasa wa 3, Waislamu watishia kuandamana, watoa masharti makali ikiwemo kupunguza bei ya bidhaa muhimu. A cause of concern raised by the Muslim community who were meeting Raila Odinga just yesterday. The cost of living, they added their voice to that, including that particular ruling on the LGBTQ community. But that's what you can expect on Taifa Leo. On the People Daily, that's what's on the front page, and I just want to perhaps take you through the headline. Not in Kenya, Ruto and Raila won the gays, where the Azimio leader, Raila Odinga, spoke when he hosted the Council of Imams and Preachers of Kenya. The officials in Nairobi just yesterday, and President William Ruto equally yesterday, was addressing guests at KICC Nairobi during the celebration of the International Women's Day. And it was a sign of rare unity, where the rivals closed rank, declaring that though they respect the court's decisions, Kenyans have religious values and traditions that must be protected. Page 4 has more details on that, but that story equally making the front page of the Standard, where we saw some of the sentiments shared by President William Ruto. And page 3, a story that definitely you might have come across on social media, how motorists abandoned officer to die, where video was circulated of an officer in Mombasa who unfortunately lost his life, as civilians in Mombasa ignored a policeman's pleas for help as he lay on the tarmac bleeding. Of course, the story behind that particular altercation between the motorist and the officer is not too clear, but according to the video clips, he was pushed out of a moving car, hence leading to that fatal eventuality. Page 3 has more details on that. But that's basically what you can expect on the front page of today's dailies. And we'll get to discuss them and interrogate some of these stories in totality, even as we interrogate the latest governance matters. It being a Friday, we'll focus on Uongozi today a little bit later on. Allow me to introduce my two panelists, even as we wait for the third gentleman to join us. Hopefully he will do so a little bit later on. And I'm currently joined by Alex Manyasi, who's a governance expert. Manyasi, karibu sana. Good morning. It's great to have you with us.
Morning. Thank you very much.
It's been a while. How has your year been?
Not bad.
Yeah?
Doing good.
Okay, that's good to know. And we're equally joined by a new face to the show, Mheshimiwa Kisang. It's a pleasure to have you with us. He is the senator of Elgeyo Marakwet County. First of all, I need to say congratulations, because, I mean, the elections were held just this year. How is the Senate treating you so far?
Actually, tomorrow will be 2 months.
Two months
since the election. The election was on the 5th of January. Basically, it's 2 months today.
Yeah.
Yes.
So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
It is an easy house.
So you can't compare the National Assembly and the Senate. What's the difference? Because you've had the experience of both houses.
It's the Senate is small. It's a house of 67 members, while National Assembly is a house of 349 members. So basically, it's very easy to be visible in Senate, and also to contribute, to have time and go through what you want to do for your people.
That's proper.
Yes.
Anyway, gentlemen, perhaps your quick reactions to a story that has elicited a lot of reaction from Kenyans following that particular Supreme Court ruling. What I'm talking about has been covered on page 6 of The Standard. Not in Kenya. Ruto on same-sex unions, where he definitely talked tough, including the deputy president and other members of the executive and the current administration, where President says in spite of court ruling, he will not allow LGBTQ to form unions in the country. Raila Odinga equally quoted as saying it's not the role of the judiciary to make laws. The Constitution recognizes separation of powers. Let Parliament do its job. Manyasi, briefly, your quick reaction to this.
I think there are certain things that we need to think about when you look at the Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
One of the issues that Kenyans will need to contend with is the fact that the constitution that they passed, when it comes to fundamental freedoms and rights, that has not changed. And therefore, legally, the freedoms of association are guaranteed under the Constitution. And so, unfortunately, depending on where you stand, you could say fortunately or unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruling on the freedoms of association by the LGBTQ groups is actually constitutional. So that's where you start.
But first, break it down for us, if
Yes.
you could, because we are in a country where, same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. But now we are saying it is constitutional for what is termed as unconstitutional to actually associate.
So I'm getting there. So the thing is that the Constitution describes marriage as between a man and a woman. So
Yes.
that's clear. There's no challenge about that. And so, therefore, that is not expected, that anyone will then go ahead and officiate a same-sex marriage. That is not likely to happen because of that provision. But in terms of association, now the thing is, when we passed this constitution, one of the things that the drafters should have asked themselves, when you give a lot of freedoms to every group, the constitution actually gives freedoms to any group to form and associate and to picket and to do anything that you want to do. And then, and therefore, when you look at that, then it means that there are freedoms to associate. But when it comes to the description of what a marriage is, then that becomes something else. But having said that, I guess it's also important, again, under this constitution, to realize that we decided as a country that we are a secular country. So we are not Christian, we are not Muslim, we are not any other faith. So when you combine all those things, then you realize that we have a very liberal constitution, so to speak. And so I will imagine that where the judges are coming from is from that premise. And therefore, any other outcry that comes out of it, either you change the Bill of Rights or then you contend with what is happening today. But the options that unfortunately people are giving in terms of remedying what is going on, in my view, are not legal, but either are faith or emotional. And I'm saying that because for you to change what the court has ruled, either you have to change the constitution. The other extreme measure is to ignore, and we have seen that happen before. To ignore the Supreme Court ruling and not register them and move on with life. So those are the only immediate options that are available. However, there are also certain things that we need to contend with as a country. That we decided two things actually, that we decided that the Supreme Court, once an issue gets to the Supreme Court, it's done. Like you have no recourse, you have no appeal.
So can Parliament censure?
It can't.
It can't. Huh?
It's finished.
No, it's an exercise in futility.
And therefore, you have boxed yourself into a scenario where 7 human beings will decide on your behalf and there's nothing else you can do. You have no second option. Lastly, I think one of the things that, and it's touched on what I've just said, is that did we as a country think about the consequences of a Supreme Court ruling that we cannot do anything about? So as a country, we also need to think about what we need to do in case a Supreme Court, for example, makes a ruling that we are uncomfortable with as a country. Then what are the options that you have? And that can only happen if we change the current constitution. Unfortunately also, is that most of the conversation when it comes to changing of the constitution, some of these thorny issues are never on the table. So even if you wanted to change the constitution today, I can assure you, this will not be one of the things that Kenyans will be discussing.
So can this case go back to the Supreme Court before we cross over to Heshimio here? In terms of, perhaps it was a 5-judge bench that gave this ruling, so we need it fully constituted and review this case once again. Is that an alternative?
So unfortunately, the Supreme Court was fully constituted because it had the numbers, the quorum that it needed to have. So it was a Supreme Court decision, and therefore that's done.
Interesting. Kisang, what do you make of this particular ruling?
Actually, we had a discussion yesterday, both in National Assembly and Senate, even the day before yesterday, when the ruling happened. And as my colleague has said, the 2010 Constitution actually was a constitution by activists. You know, most of the people were pushing for this constitution. There were some issues, especially on the political end, but there are many things that are in this constitution that we did not actually take time to check, because there is a contradiction. If you look at the chapter, Article 36, freedom of association, every person has the right to freedom of association, which includes the right to form, join, or participate in the activities of an association of any kind.
Any kind.
Any kind. You know, this is, I think, where the thing is coming from. And they are saying you will not be forced to join. Then, when you go to 45, family. The family is the natural and fundamental unit of society and the necessary basis of social order, and shall enjoy the recognition and the protection of the state. Every adult has the right to marry a person of the opposite sex based on the free consent of the parties. So now, in fact, yesterday when I spoke in Senate, you know, that ruling was disguised. You know, the ruling, the way the ruling was made, they didn't say you can marry somebody of the opposite sex, I mean of the same sex. But they said you are free to associate. The LGBTQ group, what are they pushing for? Same-sex marriage. So they're beginning to associate, to kiss, to hug, to do all these things, and eventually it is going to lead into marriage. So that's what we are saying. When we were pushing for this constitution, we said there is about 20 to 25, 30% that we need to relook at. But we said let's push it. So luckily, I think there is an ad hoc committee of both Senate and National Assembly that are reviewing to see if we can do some constitutional amendments to our constitution. So let's hope at least this ruling has come at this time, so that that committee can relook at this too, and we can see what we can do. Because we're Africans. This thing is an African. It is alien. You know, culturally, in African society, this thing was not there. But you see, it is creeping slowly. Our schools, if you go to the prisons, this is what is happening. And this is what we are saying we need to condemn. And we are seeing, we wanted as both houses to see if there is a way we can do a review of the ruling. You know, my colleague has said, you know, the bench was actually, they had quorum. There were 5. The majority is 4. Even if there were 4, there would have been quorum. So we need to look at this particular thing, because if 3 out of 7, and those were at the bench at that time were 5, and they ruled, they gave a ruling, can we review to say the majority is 4 and not 3, so that we can have a recourse? So this is, we leave it to the lawyers to go through it and see what can happen. But at least we need to look at our laws properly.
And it's been a long legal battle.
10 years.
Manyasi. I mean, actually 11 years, according to the Standard. Because they mention it started in 2012 when an activist wrote to the NGO Coordination Board requesting to be allowed to register an association to champion for the rights of the LGBTQ. And that's when it started. But I've seen a couple of statements, including the president, you know, saying we, you know, respect the ruling, but not here, not now. This is not a conversation we are having anytime soon. I think even former President Uhuru Kenyatta, when the question was put to him, I mean, it's not a conversation we're ready to have right now. But when it comes to, you know, we respect, but we do not. We've had this time and time again when it comes to Supreme Court decisions. What do you make of perhaps the approach towards some of these court rulings and court orders, and the relationship we've seen in the past between the executive and the judiciary when it comes to such controversial rulings that perhaps touch or affect them in one way or the other?
So if you look at the choice of words, it also tells you that it's because they know, for example, the president knows there's not much that he can do. Because it's, like I said, it's done. The ruling is done. But also, I think the president was being clever in the sense that he was talking about marriage, but he was not talking about the association. So it goes back to what I said about the legality or the ruling itself versus what are other provisions within the constitution around matters marriage. Now, of course, there are many controversies around the ruling, but I guess as a country, constitutionally, that's what we have. And therefore, the Supreme Court was within the Constitution in terms of the pronunciations around association. Now, what that is interpreted to mean, or to what impact that will have on society and on the future of the country, I think it's upon Kenyans to decide what they want. Because then, at this point in time, we are at a space where there's not much we can do, in as much as we have a constitution which has allowed that people can associate in whatever manner, as long as, just like Mheshimiwa read, they are not forcing you into joining them. So I think it's also important, like what do we want to have in terms of, can we say that we have limits in terms of association? The Bill of Rights is one of the pillars under the Constitution that you cannot just alter unless you go into a referendum. And so we need to decide what freedoms then do we allow. Because, for example, some of those things that we have said about the Bill of Rights, if you think about the many other freedoms that Kenyans are enjoying, for example, the politicians, the freedoms under the for the politicians to say what they want to say.
96 and 97.
Yes.
96 and 97.
You can say what you want to say. You can join a political party that you want to join. You can form one if you want. The Bill of Rights has brought a lot of freedoms that we are enjoying today. And therefore, even as we have a conversation around this, we have to also understand that this current constitution has brought a lot of good things that were never in this country. And therefore, how do we approach that to a point where we balance between what we want as society and making sure that everybody enjoys their freedom without, of course, interfering with the freedom of others.
It's a tricky balance. But let's see how that particular story develops. And perhaps on a lighter note, let's react to the editorial cartoons. And both the Daily Nation and the Standard, as you'll shortly see on your screens, have gone big with the IEBC issue. Of course, just this week, the tribunal led by Agri Muchelule concluded its investigations into Irene Masit. And just this week, we saw the president actually finalize that particular process by, removing Irene Masit from office officially. It's a game of wait and see to see whether she will appeal that particular decision. But as you can see on the Daily Nation, the IEBC is denoted as a car, one tire missing. Of course, engine problems here and there. And as you can see, they're definitely struggling to fix it. Not just the President, William Ruto, right there with spanner, but equally the Chief Justice hanging on for dear life, even as Raila Odinga is busy taking the ladder away from this too, the lady and the gentleman right there. Interesting times we live in. Equally on the Standard, this is the editorial cartoon that has been shown right there, where we can see a headless IEBC. And perhaps note the dustbin right there, perhaps showing the number of people who have actually fallen down the road when it comes to, the IEBC. Isaac Hassan mentioned his team a little bit later on. Wafula Chebukati actually lasted the full length of his tenure in that particular office, which is rare, unfortunately, in Kenya. So, gentlemen, I'll start with you, Kisang. This IEBC has been a thorny issue. And of course, just recently, we saw the IEBC selection panel, a bill that was sponsored by the National Assembly Majority Leader, Kimani Ichung'wah, that proposed expansion of the IEBC selection panel to include 2 slots of PSC, Inter-Religious Council of Kenya, to have 2 slots, 1 to the Public Service Commission, and 1 slot each for political parties, a liaison committee, and the Law Society of Kenya. We well know that the opposition chose not to, to actually present one of these people who are actually meant to complete the IEBC selection panel. What say you about the issues facing IEBC?
IEBC, and from those days of ECK all the way, we've had issues. I think the problem that we have in Kenya is trust, especially when it comes to IEBC, and not the other positions of MCA, Member of National Assembly, Women Rep, Governor, Senator. Where the thorny issue is presidential election. Because we have not seen any other person challenging IEBC's handling of elections except in the presidential election. So that is where we have an issue. And Chebukati was very lucky to have lasted the 6 years, because he's the only one actually who has lasted 6 years. I remember even Kivuitu one time, the late Kivuitu, may his soul rest in peace, 2007, he said, I don't know who won. That was very serious. It was a very serious matter.
Yeah.
So there was a special sitting of the Senate on the 19th of January, when the bill from the National Assembly came to Senate to debate the IEBC Amendment Bill 2022, and we passed. And the changes, the proposals that were brought by National Assembly, Senate agreed with all of them.
Okay.
I know the minority side had issues. They didn't want Public Service Commission to keep a representation. But we said, in the country, in our country, Kenya, Public Service Commission are our experts in terms of recruitment, in terms of HR policies. We said it's good to have one person from there who can help, especially in terms of maybe setting up the terms of reference, setting up the conditions when these people are being employed, because they are not the commissioners. The commissioners are the ones who are going to be interviewed They'll advertise, interview, and get the right people who are impartial, people with integrity, who are qualified. I think it was finalized this week, and I believe in the next few weeks, we are going to have the commissioners in place. It's unfortunate that now we don't have any commissioner in place. IEBC, just with the secretariat, no commission, no commissioners. So Irene Masit is from my county. We were in school together. She was a classmate in the university. It is unfortunate that during the tallying of votes at Bomas of Kenya, all of them, the 7 commissioners, used to take turns to read the results from the polling centers until the last day when 4 of them decided to disagree with the other 3.
Yeah.
And you know the politics around that, around what happened at Bomas of Kenya. And because the lady is from my county, we have that issue of conflict of interest. And she's a good friend of mine.
Yes, yes.
We were among the people who assisted her to be appointed as vice chair of National Government CDF Board before she went to IEPC. So, you know, we are close, we talk.
Okay.
So, and I don't want to say much beyond there, but we need to have trust.
Okay.
We need to have systems and processes in place to ensure whoever is appointed as a commissioner of IEBC, we should not care. You go around, ask for votes, let the voters decide. And when results are announced, we agree. We accept the results. I lost. I stood 2007 as a member of Marakwet West in ODM. I lost in the nomination. I didn't agree because the margin was very small. I decided to go another party. And then I lost in the general election and I accepted. I didn't even petition. 2013, I stood, I won. 2017, I stood, I won. 2022, I stood and lost. And I accepted and went home and to take care of my cows. Until now, an opportunity arose for Senate, which I stood and I won. So I also want to plead and ask, especially those who are running for presidential elections, if you lose, accept. Let us not ban the country. Let us not incite. You can imagine now, the minority side are going around for rallies saying we need the servers to be opened. During the petition, the Supreme Court petition for the presidential elections, those servers were opened. The servers, actually, everybody had it's like everybody had a server because the results were relayed directly from every polling station. Actually, even me, as an IT expert, I had the results. What you needed was just a calculator or a spreadsheet. You tally all the results and you get it. In fact, for Marakwet West constituency, I had my own tallying center. By around 10 p.m., I saw I was already losing because I'd already lost my stronghold. So, and I accepted, called my competitor and congratulated him. So I expected also Raila to have done the same, congratulate and move on.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and Manyasi, as you come in and perhaps comment on that, can we truly legislate trust when it comes to the electoral process in the country? And perhaps take us through the history of amending the IEBC Act, because I've had talk that those who are complaining right now actually supported some of the changes that were instituted a little bit earlier on during the previous administration.
So, and that's the sad part of, I keep saying, I think I was speaking somewhere 2 days ago, and I was saying sometimes when you legislate, you need to think about what happens if the shoe is on the other foot. Because the current complaints, and I think probably that's why, the current complaints are interesting because the system that just left favored the current arrangement. And so I'd not see, for instance, how someone can complain that the panel that is going to pick the IEBC commissioners then needs to have been constituted in another way. I doubt that that would be a fair approach to saying that things should be done differently. But I think also Kenya has done fairly well, even as we complain about IEBC, by the way. If you look at elections across Africa, Kenya has done very well. Look at Nigeria, for example. It's extreme in terms of disappointment, in terms of even the election itself. When you have a country of 200+ million people and only just slightly less than 20 million people voting, it's a disaster. Like the extreme minority are making decisions. And I was in Abuja last year in July, a country that produces oil. People are queuing jerry cans because the petrol stations are empty. And you're like, so the naira, their currency, at that time it was, I think, to the dollar it was 700. So when you think about, and then people go to an election and immediately vote in government. Yeah. Like that's literally what they have done. So when you think about the electoral systems, we have tried. We have been saying that the election in Kenya is among the most expensive. Probably we need to think about the technology that is easier, cheaper, more effective. But at the same time, I think as a country, even as much as we have, I think as a country we like being very good and being extremely good. And that we have tried to be that. And so any commissioner that comes into office, it doesn't matter how well they do, they need to expect that Kenyans be very critical. That's for sure. And the history that we have had also for us to get to this point, I think has been such that we had a lot of issues with the Mlolongo system where I only needed to wait for Mheshimiwa's queue. As long as I realize it's the longest, you join. I come and take the portrait and switch. And I'm announced as the winner. And there's nothing you could do about it. So depending on who is in power and who is behind who. So I think we've come a long way. It's sad that elections get into violence. For the first time in this country, we had an election that came with results that came with zero violence for the first time.
Two was equally second time.
Yeah, second time. Yeah. So I think progressively we are trying to make progress. So we should not beat ourselves too much.
Okay. And but since you brought up Nigeria, I'd like your reaction on that, Mheshimiwa Kisang, because I mean this is a leader in the African continent, largest economy. Talk about the population and the potential when it comes to natural resources. I mean, he's broken it down. And just taking a look at the voting patterns, the level of voter apathy that was actually seen in the just concluded Nigerian election, what do you make of it? Equally, just taking a look at the world page, I'm trying to peruse to page 33 really fast on the Standard, where a story has been highlighted on perhaps how the opposition split the votes. And we've had certain situations just similar to this, where the opposition split allows 10% of voters to decide Nigeria election. At some point, voting centers in opposition strongholds, voting did not take place at all. It is impossible to know. Many potential votes were lost as a result. So in terms of splitting the vote when it comes to opposition, and I mean, with the benefit of hindsight that you have, how important is a unified opposition when you're perhaps facing a party that is supported by the incumbent? Yeah, and lessons from Nigeria.
You know, Nigeria, it's unfortunate. You know, I saw when the results came out, and you know, there were high expectations because Nigeria, as my colleague has said, you know, this is a huge population of over 200 million.
Yes.
Registered voters over 100 million. And those who have voted is about 20%?
Yeah, about 20%.
About 20%.
Yeah.
You know, our turnout in Kenya in the last general election was about 69?
Yeah.
69%. So, I mean, this is really terrible because you can imagine
23% of registered voters bothered to turn up.
23%. And 23%, the opposition split more than 50% of this, they would have won. True. So the issue is, you know what happens is, it means there is further apathy in that country. People were not willing to vote. The youth, you saw the person who was elected as a president. So it means majority of those who could have voted are those who are old, not the youth. Maybe they just gave up and said, let the people decide. And then let the others decide. If you remember 1992, there was agitation on multi-party from 1990. I was in the university in 1990, second year, when Uko was killed. You know, there was a lot of riots in the country. There was multi-party that came in because of the 1988 Mlolongo issues. Then come 1992, Ford was formed. And everybody knew that Ford was going to form the government. They were going to win. What happened? The then current system that was in place must have used intelligence to ensure they convince, you know, the way you can talk to, you know, somebody went to London, talked to Matiba that you are going to be the president. Raila was there. I mean, Odinga, Jaramogi Odinga was there. He was told, he was actually the one who would have been the president. Then there was Mike Kibaki, who was the Minister for Health. Before then, when he was sacked as the Vice President, he formed the Democratic Party of Kenya, the Democratic Party. Then there were three strong opposition parties against KANU, the ruling party then. How many votes did Nyayo get? When you combined the three opposition parties, they had 70%. Over 70%. Nyayo had less than 30%, but he became the president. So it is a strategy. Even Nigeria, the ruling party in Nigeria, could have used that strategy to ensure the opposition split their votes, at the same time depress voter for those who are coming to vote. You know, you make it look like it's not important to for this election to take part in this particular election. So it is possible. Yeah, so it is a strategy. You know, politics, you can use any strategy to win. As long as you win. As long as you win. If you look at this...
divide and conquer.
No, you look at the president-elect.
Yes.
How old is he?
70 He's elderly. I think
89. 89. 89 years old.
79 or 89?
89.
Oh my, okay.
So who is really the president?
It's actually interesting. I was in Ivory Coast the day before the Nigerian election, and we had colleagues from the AU, from the AMCAO, which is part of AU, and they were rushing to go back home to vote. And I could get the sense that it was more of an elite issue, the minority who are talking about elections in Nigeria. The majority of Nigerians who are tired and suffering.
They didn't want to take part.
They just didn't want to hear. And that's unfortunate. Sometimes when you are the sober people that need to make decisions, what people don't understand is that as a voter, when you don't make that decision, someone makes the decision on behalf. And that's how 10% of the voters in Nigeria made the decision on behalf of 90%, and they have to live with it.
Anyway, we definitely need a conversation on the underlying causes of voter apathy across the African continent. But just as they've mentioned, the combined votes of the three closest rivals, one member and two former members of PDP, would have been enough for a comfortable return to power for the party, because PDP's Atiku Abubakar got 29% of the ballots cast, Labour Party, Peter Obi got 25%, and Rabiu of NNPP got 6%. So And I mean, the winner had 37%. Anyway, lessons from Nigeria. Allow us to take a short break. The bills must be paid. As we come back, we continue with our interrogation of the day's top stories, even as we continue to focus on governance matters. It being a Friday, Uongozi today coming a little bit later on as we continue to interrogate what's fresh off the press. We take a short break. Good morning. Stay with us. We'll be back in a few.